Jamie and I didn't start fighting about pets. We started fighting about dragons. It began one sleepy Sunday morning over waffles. I'd found a quiz online called, "What mythical creature should you own?" Naturally, I made Jamie take it. "Phoenix," they announced proudly after clicking through questions like, "What's your ideal Saturday?" and "Choose a magical amulet." Apparently, I'm a perfect match for a phoenix. Eternal, majestic, independent. They shot me a smug look. "What did you get?" "Dragon," I said, showing them my phone. "Obviously." Jamie snorted. "Obviously? Dragons are loyal and powerful. They've got your back in a fight. And they fly. It's literally the best option." "Dragons burn things," Jamie pointed out, gesturing to the wilted fern on our windowsill. "You couldn't even keep that alive." "Excuse me, the sun killed that fern, not fire." "It's the same vibe." I laughed, but Jamie didn't. They were looking at me like this wasn't about mythical pets at all. Later that night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, Jamie said casually, "By the way, I've been thinking, we should get a cat." And that's when it clicked. The quiz wasn't hypothetical. It was foreshadowing. "Oh no," I said, setting down the dish towel. "I'm not getting a cat." "Why not?" Jamie asked, turning to face me. "Cats are perfect. They're clean. They're affectionate on their terms. They're low maintenance, and they don't bark at the mailman like a maniac. They also don't fetch sticks, warn you about intruders, or greet you at the door like they've been waiting their whole lives for you to come home." Jamie rolled their eyes. "I don't need a furry doormat. I want a pet with boundaries." "Boundaries?" I scoffed. "Cats have trust issues. They're furry little therapist clients." Jamie glared. "Dogs are needy. They're basically toddlers who never grow up." And there it was, the line in the sand. Jamie wanted a phoenix. I wanted a dragon. Except now the fantasy had been stripped away, and we were left with fur and claws and unresolved tension. For weeks, the disagreement festered, lurking beneath our daily conversations. Jamie would casually bring up how a cat's purring is scientifically proven to reduce stress. I'd counter with stories of dogs saving people from fires or pulling kids out of wells. Jamie Googled dog allergy statistics and left the tab open on my laptop. I retaliated by sending them TikToks of dogs helping elderly owners carry groceries. But it wasn't just the arguments. It was the way Jamie talked about cats, with this quiet longing that felt so them. "I grew up with cats," they'd say wistfully. "They're like little anchors. They just know when you need them." Every time they mentioned it, I'd feel a pang of guilt, like my refusal was stomping all over their childhood nostalgia. But dogs weren't just some random preference for me either. Growing up, my family had always had dogs. Big, goofy ones with wagging tails and too much energy. They were part of every road trip, every family photo, every lazy Sunday spent tossing a tennis ball in the yard. I wanted that again. I wanted to come home to someone who'd wag their tail so hard it felt like a personal victory every time they saw me. One particularly bad day, we had it out. Jamie had been looking at cat adoption websites, and I'd snapped, "Why are you even bothering? You know I'm never going to agree to this." Jamie's face darkened. "And you know I don't want a dog, but that hasn't stopped you." "Well, I'm not giving in just because you want to relive your childhood," I shot back. Jamie froze. "You think this is just nostalgia? What else would it be?" Jamie didn't answer. They just walked out of the room, and I was left standing there, feeling like I just kicked a puppy. Or a kitten. Whatever. The silence between us stretched for days. It was the kind of Cold War that made every interaction feel loaded. I'd hand Jamie the salt at dinner, and they'd mumble, "Thanks," like it was some great act of forgiveness. I started avoiding the topic altogether, until one night I found Jamie sitting on the couch, staring at their phone with tears in their eyes. "Hey," I said, sitting beside them. "What's wrong?" Jamie turned the phone toward me. It was a picture of a black and white tuxedo cat curled up next to a golden retriever, both of them asleep on a plaid blanket. "They're a bonded pair," Jamie whispered. "They've been in the shelter for 6 months because no one wants both." I stared at the screen. "A cat and a dog?" Jamie nodded. "The shelter says they're inseparable. They sleep together, eat together. They're like siblings." Something shifted in my chest. Do you want to meet them? Jamie looked at me, their eyes cautious, like they didn't want to get their hopes up. Really? Yeah, I said, swallowing my pride. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe it's not about choosing one or the other. The next weekend, we visited the shelter. The cat's name was Oreo, and the dog was called Max. They were exactly like the photo, curled up together, a mismatched duo that somehow made perfect sense. When we walked into their enclosure, Max trotted over and licked Jamie's hand, while Oreo rubbed against my leg, purring like a tiny motorboat. Jamie and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Well, Jamie said, scratching Max behind the ears, looks like we're getting a dragon and a phoenix. And just like that, the war was over. When Oliver first suggested we get a ferret, I thought he was joking. I mean, who gets a ferret? They're like cats, but sneakier, he said with a grin, holding up his phone to show me a video of one slinking under a couch. They're so clever. You'll love it. I squinted at the screen. The ferret looked like a sock with teeth. You know they steal things, right? That's literally their thing. Exactly, he said, as if that was a selling point. It's adorable. We could name it Bandit. Bandit, I repeated flatly. So we're just leaning into the chaos now? He nodded, eyes sparkling. And because I had a soft spot for that grin of his, I found myself, 2 weeks later, driving to a rescue shelter to pick up the actual Bandit, a scrawny, cream-colored ferret with black markings around his eyes, like a tiny raccoon in witness protection. He sniffed at me from his carrier, then promptly tried to escape. See? He's already a free spirit, Oliver said, beaming. I wasn't so sure, but I had to admit, Bandit was kind of cute in a weird, gremlin-like way. The first week was an adjustment. Ferrets are not like cats. They're not like dogs. They're like tiny, hyperactive tornadoes of energy that can flatten themselves to slip under door cracks and find ways to climb furniture that defy physics. Bandit's favorite hobby was hiding my socks. Not Oliver's, of course, just mine. I'd find them weeks later, crumpled under the couch or stuffed into the back of a closet. Oliver was obsessed with him at first. He set up an elaborate ferret-proof playpen in the living room and bought every toy the pet store carried. Tunnels, squeaky balls, little hammocks. He even built Bandit a custom cage with multiple levels and ramps. It was ridiculous, but Bandit seemed to love it, and I'll admit, watching them play together was kind of adorable. But then Oliver's fascination started to fade. The first sign was the smell. Ferrets, even the clean ones, have a distinctive musk. I didn't mind it at first. It was faint, like a slightly earthy candle. But Oliver was sensitive to smells, and after a couple of weeks, he started forgetting to clean Bandit's cage. I'll do it tomorrow, he'd say, waving me off. Tomorrow always turned into the day after, and the day after that, until I was the one scrubbing the litter box and washing Bandit's blankets while Oliver played video games. Then there was the playtime. Bandit was a ball of energy who needed at least an hour of out-of-cage time every day. At first, Oliver was all about it, but soon, he started making excuses. I'm too tired, he'd say, or I've got a lot of work to catch up on. So I'd let Bandit out, chasing him around the apartment while Oliver lounged on the couch, scrolling his phone. One night, after I caught Bandit gnawing on the edge of a power cord, because I was trying to cook dinner and supervise him at the same time, I snapped. Oliver, I said, dropping the frayed cord on the table in front of him. We need to talk? He looked up, startled. What? I can't keep doing this by myself, I said. You wanted Bandit, remember? This was your idea. I take care of him, Oliver said, frowning. Do you? I shot back. When's the last time you cleaned his cage? Or took him out to play? I play with him, he said defensively. Not enough, I said, crossing my arms. He's getting bored and destructive because you're not giving him enough attention, and I'm stuck picking up the slack. Oh, come on, Oliver said, rolling his eyes. You're overreacting. He's just a ferret. He doesn't need that much attention. He's a living creature, Oliver, I said, my voice rising. He depends on us. You can't just leave him in his cage all day and call it good. Well, maybe if you weren't so controlling about it, I'd actually want to help more, he muttered. That stung. Controlling? I repeated, my voice icy. I'm trying to make sure he's not neglected. He's not neglected. Oliver snapped. You're acting like I don't care about him, which is ridiculous. Do you? I asked, genuinely wondering, because it sure doesn't feel like it. The argument spiraled from there, both of us saying things we didn't mean. By the end of it, I was in tears, and Oliver had retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Bandit, oblivious to the drama, was busy trying to stash one of my shoes under the coffee table. The next morning, we avoided each other. Oliver left for work without saying goodbye, and I spent the day fuming. I loved Bandit, but I hated how much responsibility had fallen on my shoulders. I hated feeling like the nagging parent in our relationship, and I hated that Oliver couldn't see how unfair this was. That evening, when Oliver came home, he found me sitting on the floor with Bandit, trying to untangle him from a hoodie string he decided was his mortal enemy. Oliver hesitated in the doorway, then sighed. Look, he said, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. I know I haven't been pulling my weight. I glanced up, surprised. You think? He winced. Okay, I deserve that. But seriously, I'll do better. I promise. I wanted to believe him, but part of me was skeptical. It's not just about promises, Oliver. It's about actually showing up. Bandit needs us to be a team. I know, he said, sitting down next to me. I'll start tonight. I'll clean his cage and... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening. Is that my wallet? I followed his gaze to see Bandit dragging his wallet under the couch. Yep, I said, unable to suppress a grin. Good luck getting it back. Oliver groaned but laughed, reaching under the couch to retrieve his stolen property. For a moment, it felt like things might actually get better. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Was I being too harsh, expecting him to step up? Or was it fair to feel like this was his responsibility since he'd been the one so desperate to get a ferret in the first place? The cat was the first to notice something was wrong. Pixel, our chubby tabby, usually reserved her energy for mealtimes and sunbathing on the windowsill. But that morning, she sat in the middle of the living room, staring at the front door like it owed her money. I noticed her when I came out of the bedroom, half asleep and searching for coffee. What's up with you? I muttered, scratching her head as I passed. She didn't blink. That should have been my first clue. By the time I realized something was off, it was too late. The knock came just as I finished pouring my first cup. Sharp, deliberate. I froze. Nobody knocked on our door. Not without texting first. And certainly not this early on a Saturday. Mila walked in, yawning, her hair sticking out in all directions. Who's that? She asked, squinting at the door. Don't know, I said, setting the coffee down and heading toward it. Pixel bolted, her tail puffed up like a bottle brush. Another bad sign. I opened the door cautiously, expecting a neighbor or maybe a package delivery gone wrong. Instead, I found my dad. Dad? I blinked, unsure if I was still dreaming. What are you doing here? He stood on the porch, wearing a rumpled jacket and holding a battered suitcase. His graying hair was wild from the wind, and his face was drawn in a way that made him look older than I remembered. He'd never visited me in Colorado before. He'd always said it was too far, which was code for, I don't approve of your life choices. I need a place to stay, he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. What? Mila's voice floated from the kitchen. Who is it? It's my dad, I called back, still staring at him. He's, here. Mila appeared behind me, her eyebrows shooting up when she saw him. Mr. Parker, she said, forcing a smile. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is, he said, stepping inside uninvited. But I didn't know where else to go. Go for what? I asked, shutting the door behind him. He dropped the suitcase with a thud and looked around, taking in the small, cluttered apartment like he was inspecting it for structural flaws. Did you rob a bank? I joked, trying to break the tension. He didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to me and said, Your Uncle Pete's after me. I blinked. Uncle Pete? As in Mom's brother? The one who taught me to ride a bike. That's the one, Dad said, sitting heavily on the couch. He's trying to kill me. Mila and I exchanged a look. I said slowly, are you sure? Well, he's Pete. He owns a bait shop. He doesn't exactly scream, homicidal maniac. You think I'm joking? Dad snapped, leaning forward. Do you know how many times I've had to change my number in the past month? 4. He keeps finding me, keeps calling. And yesterday, I caught him outside my house, watching me. Okay, Mila said, her voice calm and soothing in a way that made me wonder if she thought he was losing it. Why would Uncle Pete want to kill you? Dad hesitated. It's complicated. That's not an answer, I pointed out. It's family business, he said. Stuff you don't need to worry about. I crossed my arms. You showed up on my doorstep at 8 in the morning with a suitcase, and now you're telling me it's not my business? Mila put a hand on my arm. Let's all just take a breath, she said. Mr. Parker, why don't you have some coffee? And maybe tell us what's going on in a way that makes sense. Dad looked at her like she'd just suggested he eat a raw onion, but he nodded. Fine. Coffee sounds good. As Mila went to get it, he turned to me and said, You've got a nice place. A little small, but nice. Thanks, I said, sitting across from him. Now spill. He took a deep breath, glancing toward the kitchen to make sure Mila wasn't listening. Pete and I had a disagreement. About what? Money, he said reluctantly. There was an inheritance. From your grandfather. I thought Grandpa left everything to Grandma. He did, Dad said, his voice lowering further. But before he died, he told me about a safe deposit box. Said it was for me. Pete didn't take too kindly to that. I frowned. What was in the box? Dad hesitated. Some cash. A map. A map? I repeated, incredulous. What is this, Indiana Jones? It's real, Dad said, his voice defensive. Your grandfather was a smart man. He didn't trust banks. He hid things. Valuable things. Like what? Mila asked, returning with a mug of coffee. Gold, Dad said. Jewelry. Maybe more. I haven't found it yet. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. So let me get this straight, I said. You think Uncle Pete is trying to kill you over some buried treasure? It's not treasure, Dad snapped. It's family history. And it's mine. Mila gave me a look that said, What the hell is happening? I had no answer. All I knew was that my father had turned my Saturday into the start of the weirdest weekend of my life. And somehow, I had this sinking feeling it was only going to get stranger from here. A stupid, vintage, mid-century modern chair that I absolutely adored and that Nate, my boyfriend of 2 years, absolutely did not. He called it the ugly chair, which I considered both reductive and offensive to its craftsmanship. It wasn't just a chair. It was a statement piece, a find I'd spent hours hunting for at a flea market. When I brought it home, practically glowing with pride, Nate took one look at it and said, That thing looks like it was fished out of a dumpster. I should have walked away from him then and there, but I loved him, and love makes you blind to red flags like bad taste. Anyway, the chair stayed. For years, it sat in the corner of our living room, ignored but tolerated. Until last weekend, when Nate decided he couldn't take it anymore. I'm just saying, he said as I sat reading in the ugly chair. It doesn't fit with the vibe of the room. I lowered my book. The vibe of the room? You know, like everything else in here is modern, sleek. That chair looks like it belongs in a 70s sitcom. It is modern, I said, stroking the armrest defensively. It's mid-century modern. That's the entire point. It's mid-century hideous, he said, laughing, as if that settled the argument. Come on, Sam. We've outgrown it. Let's get something new. Something we both like. Something we both like. Classic Nate, framing his wants as compromises. I'd heard this script before. This was the same man who once compromised on my favorite art print by accidentally knocking it off the wall and then offering to buy me a replacement that mysteriously fit his taste better than mine. I knew exactly how this would go. The chair would leave, and in its place, he'd bring home something gray, soulless, and vaguely Scandinavian. And I'd be expected to smile and nod like it didn't hurt. You know what? I said, standing up. No, the chair stays. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. This chair is a masterpiece. You're just too blind to see it. His eyebrows shot up. Blind? Or just not delusional? Delusional? I was practically shouting now. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's ugly. Sam, it's not about liking it or not. It's about having a home that doesn't look like a set from that 70s show. Oh, so now I have bad taste? I didn't say that. You implied it. He threw up his hands. You know what? Fine. Keep the damn chair. But don't come crying to me when people think we're running a retro furniture museum. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. At least the chair has personality. Unlike your minimalist, let's pretend we live in a sterile showroom nonsense. You think I don't have personality? He snapped. Maybe I just prefer a home that's comfortable, not crammed with stuff you hoard like some kind of aesthetic dragon. That one stung. Hoarding? You're calling me a hoarder now? If the shoe fits. Oh, I was done. Absolutely done. Without thinking, I marched over to the chair, grabbed it by the backrest, and started dragging it toward the door. What the hell are you doing? He asked, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. I'm taking it outside, I said through gritted teeth. Since you hate it so much, I'll just sit in it on the curb and wait for someone with taste to appreciate it. You're being ridiculous, he said, grabbing the other side of the chair. You're not taking it outside. Oh, now you care about it? I care about you acting like a lunatic over a chair. We wrestled over that thing like two toddlers fighting over a toy. At one point, I nearly tripped, and he let go just in time for me to stumble backward into the wall, chair still in my grip. Let go, I growled. You let go, he shouted back. And then, with a horrifying crack, one of the legs snapped clean off. We both froze. The chair, my beautiful, irreplaceable chair, lay crooked and defeated on the floor. I felt tears prick my eyes. You broke it. I broke it? You were the one yanking it around like a maniac. If you'd just left it alone. If you'd just been reasonable. I held up a hand. Stop. Just stop. I knelt beside the chair, inspecting the damage. The break looked clean, maybe fixable, but in that moment, I didn't care. I was too furious, too heartbroken. You don't get it, I said quietly. This chair isn't just a piece of furniture. It's mine. I picked it. I loved it. And now it's ruined because you couldn't let me have one thing. For the first time, Nate didn't have a snappy comeback. He just stood there, looking awkward and vaguely guilty. I didn't mean to break it, he muttered. Yeah, well, congratulations. You did. I got up, grabbed the broken chair, and carried it to the spare room. When I came back, Nate was sitting on the couch, silent. We didn't talk for the rest of the night. And now, 3 days later, the chair is still in the spare room, and we're still barely speaking. I know I overreacted, but I can't shake the feeling that this was about more than the chair. It was about respect, or the lack of it. About feeling like I'm always compromising, always giving up pieces of myself to keep the peace. So, Reddit. AITA? The day I accidentally unleashed chaos at the neighborhood potluck started with a pie. Specifically, a pecan pie. My boyfriend Caleb had been raving about his mom's recipe for years, insisting it was the crown jewel of his family's Thanksgiving table. I'd finally caved and asked for the recipe, thinking I could surprise him by making it myself for the potluck. Are you sure you want to try this? Caleb had asked, skeptical but intrigued, as I rummaged through the pantry for corn syrup. Mom's pie is kind of legendary. I've baked before, I said, rolling my eyes. How hard can it be? I should have taken the look on his face as a warning, but I was determined. The potluck was hosted by the condo association, and since we were the youngest couple in the building, I wanted to make a good impression. More importantly, I wanted to impress Caleb. His mom was one of those terrifyingly perfect people who whipped up 5-course meals while making it look effortless, and I was still trying to prove I could, at the very least, handle her pie. The pie came out looking perfect. Golden crust, glossy pecan topping. It was a masterpiece. I even practiced the story I'd tell when Caleb inevitably mentioned it was his mom's recipe. Oh, just something I threw together, I'd say, with a breezy wave of my hand. Confidence on the outside, panic on the inside. We arrived at the potluck with the pie in a glass dish and a matching grin on my face. Caleb carried it to the dessert table while I made small talk with Mrs. Abernathy, who was telling me, for the 5th time, about the correct way to prune rose bushes. I barely noticed when someone called Caleb over to the drink station. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was not noticing when, a few minutes later, he came back without the pie dish. When dinner was winding down and people started wandering over to the dessert table, I decided it was time to strike. "Try the pecan pie," I announced, nudging Caleb with a wink. "I made it." He raised his eyebrows. "You brought the pie?" "Yes, I brought the pie. Your mom's recipe, remember?" "That's not the pie I put on the dessert table," Caleb said, his face a mix of confusion and horror. "What do you mean that's not the pie you put on the dessert table? Yours was in a glass dish, right? I put it on the counter next to—" "Oh, no." His eyes darted to the far side of the room, where Mrs. Abernathy was holding my pie, now sliced and plated, as if she'd been presenting it as her own. I froze. My brain tried to process what I was seeing, but none of it made sense. Mrs. Abernathy's usual contribution to the potluck was store-bought fruitcake. How had she ended up with my pie? "She must have thought it was hers," Caleb said in a low voice. "Look, oh my God, she's serving it." Sure enough, Mrs. Abernathy was smiling serenely as she handed out slices to a group of neighbors who were already nodding with murmurs of approval. "No," I hissed. "Absolutely not." Caleb grabbed my arm. "Let it go. It's just a pie." "It's not just a pie. It's my pie." I marched over before he could stop me. Mrs. Abernathy was mid-sentence, describing her secret ingredient. "What secret ingredient?" to a wide-eyed Mr. Jennings when I tapped her on the shoulder. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think there's been a mix-up. That pie is actually mine." Mrs. Abernathy blinked at me, her expression polite but icy. "I'm sorry, dear. What did you say?" "The pie," I said again, louder this time. "That's my pie. Caleb and I brought it." She looked at the pie in question, then back at me, her lips curling into a tight smile. "I don't think so, sweetheart. I baked this pie myself just this afternoon." I stared at her, dumbfounded. Was this a joke? "You don't even like pecan pie," I blurted. "You said so at the last potluck." "Well, I decided to try something new," she said, her tone saccharine, "and it seems I'm quite good at it." Behind me, I could feel Caleb tugging at my sleeve, whispering something about letting it go. But I couldn't. This wasn't just about the pie anymore. It was about principle. "If you baked this pie," I said slowly, "what's the ratio of corn syrup to sugar in the filling?" Mrs. Abernathy's smile faltered. "Excuse me? Come on, it's your recipe, isn't it? You must know the ratio." The room went silent. People were staring now, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Mrs. Abernathy's cheeks flushed a deep pink, but she didn't back down. "Well, I don't measure," she said. "I do it by feel." "You're lying," I snapped, before I could stop myself. "That pie is mine. You stole it." The room erupted into gasps. Mrs. Abernathy looked like she might faint. Caleb groaned, burying his face in his hands. And then Mr. Jennings, holding an empty plate, said, "Well, whoever made it, it's fantastic. Best pecan pie I've ever had." "Thank you," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly, as if the matter were settled. I was about to argue further when a little voice piped up from the corner. "Mrs. Abernathy didn't make it," said Josh, the neighbor's kid. "I saw her take it off the counter. She said, 'Oh, this'll save me the trouble.'" The silence was deafening. Mrs. Abernathy looked like she might evaporate on the spot. I stood there, vindicated but mortified, as the entire room turned to me. "Well," Caleb said, breaking the tension with a nervous laugh, "guess we know who wins Best Dish this year." Mrs. Abernathy stormed out shortly after, muttering something about ungrateful neighbors. Caleb and I stayed just long enough to collect the empty pie dish and endure a few too many jokes about Piegate. By the time we got home, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "Next time," Caleb said, flopping onto the couch, "maybe just bring cookies." AITA for calling out Mrs. Abernathy in front of everyone? Or should I have let her keep the pie and the glory? A simple mistake. Really. My roommate Sam and I both had the same brand of boots, except mine were scuffed to hell, and his were pristine, like they'd never seen a sidewalk. He was rushing out the door for a date, and in his hurry, he grabbed mine by mistake. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that night, when I got home, his boots were still sitting by the door. My boots. The realization hit me like a punch. Sam had left in my shoes. At first, I laughed. The idea of him showing up to dinner in my battered, worn-out boots? Hilarious. Then I pictured his date pointing it out, or Sam awkwardly trying to explain himself. He was always so image-conscious, so put together. This was the kind of thing that would drive him nuts. I debated texting him to let him know, but I figured, let him figure it out. He deserved a little humbling. When Sam got back that night, though, he wasn't his usual self. Normally, after a date, he'd either crash on the couch with a beer and give me the full play-by-play, or he'd disappear into his room and text me a thumbs-up emoji the next morning if things had gone well. But this time, he just breezed past me with a distracted, "Hey," and went straight to his room. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my boots like they held the secrets of the universe. His hands were clasped around his coffee mug, and his face was pale. "Rough night?" I asked, grabbing a mug for myself. He glanced up at me, his eyes darting away as quickly as they'd landed. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat. "You could say that." I gestured to the boots. "Realize halfway through dinner they weren't yours?" He didn't laugh, didn't even crack a smile, just shrugged and muttered, something like that. That's when I knew something was up. "Sam," I said, sitting down across from him. "What's going on?" At first, he waved me off. "It's nothing. Just weird vibes last night." "Weird vibes?" I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, so, I was walking to meet Chloe, right? And I noticed this guy behind me. Just a normal dude, nothing sketchy. But then, like, every time I turned a corner, he was still there. I thought maybe he was heading the same way, but it started to feel off." I frowned. Maybe it was just coincidence? "That's what I thought," Sam said, his grip tightening on the coffee mug. "Until I got to the restaurant." He stopped a block away, just standing there, watching me. The room felt colder all of a sudden. "Did you call anyone? Tell the hostess?" I asked. "No." By the time I got inside, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Chloe showed up, and I figured it was nothing. He paused, staring at the boots again. But when I left to come home, he was still there. Same guy, same spot. My stomach turned. "What the hell? Did he follow you here?" Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah. He stayed a few houses down, though. Didn't come near the door. I watched him from the window until he left." I didn't know what to say. It was creepy, no doubt, but it could have been a misunderstanding. Maybe the guy lived nearby. Maybe Sam was overthinking. But then Sam said something that made my blood run cold. "When I finally got home, I noticed the boots," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your boots." And I thought, what if he wasn't following me? The implication hit me like a freight train. My boots. Me. I tried to brush it off. That's crazy. Why would someone follow me? I'm just some guy. I don't. You don't what? Sam interrupted, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. Have enemies? Piss anyone off? Because let's be honest, my name. You're not exactly the world's most diplomatic person. Okay, rude, I snapped, but his words stuck. Sure, I'd gotten into some arguments over the years. A bad breakup, a coworker who'd sworn revenge after I got the promotion he wanted. But none of that seemed like the kind of thing that would lead to this. Maybe it's nothing, I said, more to convince myself than Sam. A coincidence. Some weirdo who got bored and moved on. Sam didn't look convinced. You should be careful, he said. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every shadow felt suspicious, every stranger's glance too long. When I walked to the store, I kept checking behind me, but I never saw anyone. Then, that night, it happened. I was coming back from a late shift at work when I spotted him. Standing across the street from our apartment, under a street lamp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hoodie that obscured his face. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring. My heart raced as I fumbled for my keys. My brain screamed at me to get inside, to lock the door, to call someone. But then, as I reached the steps, I turned back. He was gone. I told Sam about it when I got inside. He went pale, grabbed a baseball bat, and insisted on checking every room in the apartment, even though I was sure the guy hadn't followed me in. Now, neither of us can sleep. Sam's convinced we should report it, but I keep hesitating. What if it really is just some harmless creep? Or worse, what if it's not? And now I can't stop wondering, why did he follow Sam? Or was he just waiting for me to come home? AITA for not taking this seriously earlier? Or for leaving my boots where someone could find them? Because I'm starting to feel like this is my fault. It was supposed to be a secret, not in the sinister, scandalous way secrets usually are. More like a quiet, sacred thing I wanted to keep for myself. My engagement to Ethan wasn't a surprise, not exactly. We'd been together for 7 years, and everyone from our friends to the barista at the coffee shop we frequented had been waiting for it to happen. Still, when he proposed on a rainy Tuesday night in our tiny apartment, it felt intimate and ours, something untouched by the noise of the world. So, when we started planning the engagement party, I envisioned it as an extension of that feeling. Warm, low-key, deliberate. The guest list was small, our closest friends, a handful of family members. Just the people who got us. That's where my sister, Laura, came into the equation. Or, more accurately, didn't. Laura and I had a complicated relationship. She was older by 3 years, beautiful in the way Instagram models are, and somehow always found the gravitational center of every room. She wasn't malicious or cruel. If anything, she was funny, magnetic, and full of life. But she was also a force. And that force often left me feeling like the backup singer in my own story. I'd spent my entire childhood watching her turn every moment into hers. My 8th grade piano recital? She burst through the doors halfway through, yelling about how she'd aced her driver's test. My high school graduation party? She gave an impromptu speech about her college plans. Even Ethan's birthday dinner last year had somehow spiraled into an hour-long anecdote about her travel misadventures in Greece. I wasn't angry about it anymore. I'd come to accept that Laura was just Laura, and in her way, she loved me. But this engagement party? This was the one time I needed her to not be the center of the universe. I wanted people to talk about me and Ethan, to see us. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that Laura would never mean to hijack the night, but she would. It was just who she was. So, I left her off the guest list. The decision wasn't as callous as it sounds. I agonized over it for weeks, staring at her name on the spreadsheet, picturing how it would go. She'd show up in a dress that could be featured in a fashion editorial, dazzling everyone with her wit, and by the end of the night, someone would ask, "Wait, who's getting engaged again?" I knew I was taking a risk, but I told myself she'd understand if I framed it delicately. "Laura," I'd rehearsed in the mirror, "it's going to be a really intimate thing. Mostly friends and a few family members who are close to Ethan. I don't want you to feel left out. It's just about keeping it small." But I never got the chance to deliver the speech. She found out 2 days before the party. Of course she did. My mom let it slip during a casual phone call. "She's hosting an engagement party this weekend?" Lara's voice, even over the phone, was unmistakable. It had this way of cutting through the air, sharp and sweet at the same time. Why didn't she tell me? "Well, sweetie, it's more of a small gathering." My mom had tried, but Laura wasn't one to be soothed. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Hey, I heard about the party. What's going on?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "It's not a big deal, I promise. Just something small." Her response came almost instantly. "Small doesn't mean I shouldn't be there. I'm your sister." Guilt clawed at me, but I didn't back down. "It's about the vibe, Laura. You'd hate it. Super low-key." "Seriously?" she replied. "You don't want me there because you think I'll steal the spotlight. Just say it." I didn't reply. What could I say? She was right, and we both knew it. The night of the party was, by all accounts, perfect. The lighting was soft and golden, Ethan looked at me like I hung the moon, and our friends buzzed with excitement as they toasted to our future. I finally felt seen, not as Lara's little sister or a supporting character, but as myself, with Ethan at my side. Then, at around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she was, Lara, standing on my doorstep in a red dress that shimmered like fire, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my rent. "I wasn't invited," she said, breezing past me into the living room, "but I couldn't let you celebrate alone. That would be cruel." The room froze. Ethan gave me a look, half amused, half concerned, and I plastered on a smile that felt like it might shatter. Lara was, predictably, a hit. Within minutes, she had everyone laughing, leaning toward her as she recounted some story about narrowly avoiding an international incident in Italy. I stood in the corner, glass in hand, watching as my carefully curated night tilted toward her orbit. It was like watching a slow-motion train derailment. At the end of the night, as the guests trickled out, Lara lingered. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between defiance and apology. "I'm sorry for crashing," she said, her voice softer now, "but I couldn't not be here. You're my sister. Don't you get that?" I wanted to yell at her, to tell her she'd proven my point, that she'd done exactly what I was afraid she would. But instead, I said, "It wasn't about not wanting you there. It was about wanting it to be about me for once." Her face fell. "It was about you. It always is. You just don't see it because you're too busy trying to keep me out." She left before I could respond, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. I've replayed that conversation in my head 100 times since. Was I wrong for excluding her? Or was it fair to want something that felt like mine, even if it meant shutting her out? I still can't decide. AITA? The trouble started with a voicemail. "Hey, babe, just a heads up." Tyler's voice crackled through the speaker, a mix of excitement and nerves. "Don't make any plans for Friday night, okay? I've got something special lined up. Trust me, you're gonna love it." Friday night? That was when I had something special planned. I'd been working on my surprise for over a month. Our little town didn't have much in the way of excitement, but it did have the Stardust Observatory, perched at the top of a hill and boasting a view of the kind of night skies you usually only see on a screensaver. Tyler loved space. The kind of love that made them stay up late watching documentaries about black holes and cry the first time they saw Saturn's rings through a telescope. So, I'd arranged for a private stargazing session. Just us, the stars, and a local astronomer I'd bribed with homemade cookies to let us use the observatory after hours. I stared at my phone, Tyler's voice still echoing in my ears. "You're gonna love it." Well, this was going to be a problem. By Friday afternoon, I was a bundle of nerves. Tyler had been cagey all day, texting me things like, "We're something you can move in," and "No hints, don't even try." It was sweet, really, but it left me with zero information to work with. All I knew was that I needed to get us to the observatory by 9 p.m. At 6:30, Tyler showed up at my door, grinning like they'd just cracked the code to happiness. Ready for an adventure? I tried not to panic as I stepped outside, dressed in my best, active but cute outfit. "Sure. Where are we going?" "Nice try," they said, taking my hand and leading me to the car. The first red flag appeared when we turned onto the highway heading out of town. Where are we going exactly?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Tyler just winked. "It's a surprise." Surprises are great, unless you're juggling two at the same time. As we drove further and further away from town, I felt the observatory slipping through my fingers. I couldn't exactly call off Tyler's plans without ruining their moment, but I also couldn't let the stargazing session go to waste. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a clearing in the woods. My jaw dropped. There, in the middle of the trees, was a full-blown obstacle course. Ropes dangling between trees, wooden platforms high above the ground, and a zip line that disappeared into the darkening sky. "Surprise," Tyler said, beaming. "I know you've been stressed lately, so I thought we could do something fun and ridiculous. Nothing like climbing trees to blow off steam, right?" I blinked at them, half impressed, half dreading how much coordination this was going to take. "You planned all this?" "Yep. They grabbed a pair of harnesses from a nearby stand and handed me one. "Come on, it'll be fun. Besides, I know you secretly love heights." I absolutely do not secretly love heights, but Tyler looked so proud of themselves that I couldn't say no. The next hour was a chaotic blur of shouting, laughter, and me nearly losing a shoe while clambering across a swaying rope bridge. Tyler hooped like a maniac as they ziplined past me, shouting, "You're doing amazing," while I clung to a tree for dear life. It was fun. I couldn't deny that. By the time we reached the final platform, the sun had set completely, and the woods were bathed in moonlight. Tyler grabbed my hand, their face glowing with excitement. "Thanks for humoring me," they said, leaning in for a quick kiss. "I know this was kind of crazy." "It was perfect," I admitted. Even as I felt the sting of guilt creeping in, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from the astronomer. "Astronomer, you guys close? The sky's looking amazing tonight." I swallowed hard. It was now or never. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "there's one more part to the evening. I, kind of planned a surprise too." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "You did?" "Yeah, and it's time sensitive, but I think you'll like it." "What is it?" I hesitated, then decided to rip off the Band-Aid. "I booked us a private stargazing session at the observatory. It starts in, 15 minutes. Tyler's eyes widened, and for a second, I couldn't read their expression. Was that disappointment? Annoyance? Then they laughed, shaking their head in disbelief. "Of course you did. You're such a nerd," says the person who cried over Saturn. I shot back, relieved they weren't upset. "Well, we'd better get moving then," Tyler said, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the car. We arrived at the observatory just in time, breathless and still buzzing from the obstacle course. The astronomer greeted us with a knowing smile and led us up to the telescope, where Tyler immediately launched into a flurry of questions about nebulae and light pollution. As we stood there under the dome, Tyler's hand warm in mine, I couldn't help but marvel at how the night had turned out. It wasn't what either of us had planned, exactly, but it was better. A little messy, a little chaotic, and absolutely unforgettable. Still, as I watched Tyler wipe away a tear after spotting Jupiter's moons, I wondered if I should have handled it differently. Did I steamroll their plans by insisting on mine? I have a theory. Every family gathering is a live grenade. Most people tiptoe around, trying not to set it off, but me? I like to pull the pin and see what happens. It's not malicious. I genuinely think it's funny. The problem is, not everyone shares my sense of humor. Case in point, the great birthday debacle of last weekend. My sister Lily was turning 30, a milestone she'd been stressing about for months. She'd been dropping hints that she wanted her birthday to be classy and mature. So, naturally, she decided to throw a sit-down dinner at this swanky rooftop restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the menus don't have prices, and they serve things like essence of truffle foam. I knew from the moment I walked in that I didn't belong there. I'm more of a pizza and beer kind of guy, but hey, it was Lily's big day, and I wasn't about to ruin it. Not intentionally, anyway. The trouble started when I saw the cake. Lily had ordered this elaborate, multi-tiered monstrosity that looked like it belonged on a cooking show. It was covered in gold leaf, edible flowers, and some kind of glitter that probably cost more than my car insurance. The words 30, flirty, thriving were written across the top in perfect script. I overheard her telling someone it was custom-made by some famous pastry chef, and I swear she looked prouder of that cake than of her college diploma. It was stunning, sure, but it was also begging to be mocked. The evening went smoothly at first. Lots of polite chatter, clinking glasses, and toasts about Lily's accomplishments and bright future. But by the time dessert rolled around, everyone had loosened up a little. That's when the waiter wheeled out the cake, and the room erupted into applause like we were unveiling a statue or something. Lily was beaming, basking in the attention, and I thought, what's a birthday without a little fun? As the waiter prepared to cut the cake, I stood up, holding my champagne flute. Wait, I said, clinking my glass to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. Perfect. I cleared my throat, putting on my best serious face. Before we dive into this masterpiece, I just want to say a few words. Lily, turning 30 is a huge deal. It's a time to reflect on where you've been, where you're going, and who you are. I paused dramatically, letting the tension build. And who you are, I continued, is someone who paid $500 for a cake that looks like it's auditioning for the Great British Bake Off. The laughter was instant, and honestly, it was louder than I expected. Even a couple of Lily's friends who always seem allergic to fun were cracking up. I looked at Lily, waiting for her to join in, but her smile was frozen in place, like someone had hit the pause button. "Very funny, Jake," she said through gritted teeth, her voice as tight as a violin string. "But maybe keep the jokes to yourself for one night?" I shrugged, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Lil. It's all in good fun. You've got a $500 cake. That's impressive. You should be proud." "Actually," she said, her tone icy, "it was $750. But thanks for ruining the moment." The room went dead quiet. Even the waiter looked uncomfortable as he sliced into the cake like it might explode. I felt the back of my neck get hot. "I wasn't ruining anything," I said, trying to laugh it off. "I was just making everything about you as usual," she snapped. "This is my birthday, Jake, not open mic night." Oof, that one landed. I sat down, muttering an apology, but the damage was done. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by that awkward tension that makes people suddenly very interested in their wine glasses. The rest of the night was brutal. Lily barely looked at me, and Mom kept shooting me these disappointed glances like I'd spilled red wine on the tablecloth. After dinner, when everyone moved to the rooftop bar, I tried to make amends. "Lily, seriously," I said, cornering her by the fire pit. "I didn't mean to upset you. I thought it was funny." She sighed, her arms crossed. "That's the problem, Jake. You always think it's funny, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just mean." "Mean? Come on. I wasn't mocking you. I was mocking the cake. The cake that I worked really hard to pick out," she said, her voice rising. "The cake that was supposed to be a highlight of my birthday. But now, that's what people are going to remember. Your stupid joke?" I didn't know what to say. To me, it still felt like an overreaction. It was one comment, a harmless little jab, but to her, it was apparently a personal attack. The next morning, I woke up to a family group chat that had exploded with messages. Mom was talking about how disappointed she was in me, and Dad chimed in with, "It's time to grow up, Jake." Even Lily had sent a curt message, "Thanks for the reminder why I don't tell you important stuff in advance." So now, here I am, replaying the whole thing in my head and wondering if I really screwed up as badly as they all say. Sure, maybe my timing wasn't great, and maybe I could have kept the joke to myself, but it's not like I insulted her or ruined the cake. If anything, I made the party more memorable, right? Isn't that what everyone wants? A story to laugh about later? Or am I just the guy who can't leave well enough alone? AITA? I'm not saying I'm a bad person. I'm just saying that sometimes people misinterpret the truth, and that's not really on me. Like at Thanksgiving last week, when everyone decided I was the villain for simply pointing out a few inconvenient facts. Honestly, I didn't even start it. It was my sister Amanda, swanning in with her new boyfriend, Ethan. Ethan was fine, generic, even. The kind of guy who looks like he always has a motivational podcast playing in his AirPods. He came in carrying a pie he'd made from scratch. Amanda made sure to emphasize this, and everyone acted like he'd baked the Mona Lisa. My mom was practically swooning. "A man who bakes. Amanda, you hit the jackpot," she said, clapping her hands like a seal. I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled politely and asked what kind of pie it was. "Apple," Ethan said, beaming like he'd just invented it. "Classic," I said. "That's nice. I mean, it's hard to mess up apple pie, right?" He chuckled nervously, like he wasn't sure if I was joking. Amanda shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. I wasn't trying to be rude. I was just pointing out the obvious. Apple pie is the beige cardigan of desserts. It's fine, but let's not pretend it's revolutionary. Things escalated during dinner. My mom, bless her heart, loves to do a "what's everyone thankful for" roundtable. When it got to Amanda, she launched into a heartfelt monologue about how grateful she was for Ethan, how he'd supported her through a tough time at work, and how he'd inspired her to start running again. Ethan looked down at her like she was the only person in the room, which would have been sweet if it didn't feel like they were auditioning for a rom-com. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I'm thankful for my health, my dog, and the fact that I managed to fix my car's transmission without spending a fortune. That's great, Amanda said, her voice dripping with that big sister condescension I know too well. But, gratitude is about more than just practical things. It's about people, connections. Oh, of course, I said, smiling tightly. I just didn't want to turn this into a TED Talk. The table laughed nervously, but Amanda's jaw tightened. My mom tried to smooth things over by asking Ethan about his job, which I instantly regretted because he launched into a 10-minute lecture about corporate synergy or some nonsense. I tuned him out, focusing instead on my mashed potatoes, until he said something that pulled me back into the conversation. The thing about success, Ethan was saying, is that it's all about mindset. If you believe you can do it, you will. I couldn't help myself. Right, I said. But mindset doesn't pay rent. You need opportunity too. Ethan blinked at me, startled. Well, sure, but... take Amanda, I said, gesturing toward my sister. She's worked hard, no doubt, but let's not forget she had Dad's connections to get her foot in the door. That's not mindset. That's privilege. The room went silent. Amanda stared at me, her face a mix of shock and fury. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could teleport out of there. My mom opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. What the hell, Sarah? Amanda finally snapped. Why would you bring that up? I'm just saying, I said, raising my hands defensively. Hard work is great, but let's not ignore the bigger picture. It's not a dig. It's the truth. Well, it feels like a dig, Amanda shot back. Why can't you just be happy for me without tearing me down? I'm not tearing you down, I said, my voice rising. I'm just giving context. Sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. It's not about being uncomfortable, Amanda said, practically hissing. It's about you always needing to make everything about how much harder your life is. We get it. You didn't have the same advantages, but that doesn't mean you have to ruin every good moment for everyone else. Ruin? I said, laughing bitterly. I'm not ruining anything. If pointing out the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe that's on them. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to calm things down. Hey, it's a holiday. Let's all just... No, Ethan, Amanda interrupted, glaring at me. She does this all the time. She can't just let people have their happiness. It's like she's addicted to being the underdog. I felt my face heat up. Addicted? Seriously? I'm sorry if my life hasn't been a cakewalk like yours, Amanda, but maybe if people actually acknowledge that once in a while, I wouldn't have to point it out. Amanda pushed her chair back, standing up. You know what? Forget it. Enjoy your mashed potatoes, Sarah. I'm done. She stormed out of the dining room, Ethan trailing awkwardly behind her. The rest of the table sat in stunned silence. My mom gave me a disappointed look, and my dad just shook his head. After dinner, I helped clean up in silence, replaying the argument in my head. Was I really the bad guy here? All I did was state facts. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if maybe Amanda had a point. Did I really need to bring up Dad's connections? Did I really need to remind everyone how much harder I'd had it? When I got home, I found myself scrolling through Joanna's Facebook again. Her promotion post had gotten even more likes. For a second, I considered commenting something snarky, but I stopped myself. Instead, I closed the app and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. Mara had never been to Café Halcyon before. It was tucked into a narrow alley that she would have walked past 1,000 times without noticing if not for the flyer someone had slipped into her coat pocket. For those who seek answers to questions they dare not ask. Open after dusk, the cafe itself looked ordinary enough from the outside, with a weathered wooden sign swinging gently above the door. Inside, though, was an entirely different story. The air smelled faintly of spices and rain, and the dim lighting gave the impression that the cafe existed somewhere outside of time. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books but with jars, hundreds of them, each containing something strange. Glowing liquids, fluttering moths suspended mid-flight, shadows that swirled like smoke. The place was mostly empty, save for the barista behind the counter and a few scattered patrons. Each of them sat alone, hunched over steaming mugs, their faces shadowed and unreadable. Mara approached the counter hesitantly. The barista was a tall woman with silver hair braided into a crown. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, and her smile was razor-thin. "You're new," the barista said, her voice soft but somehow commanding. Mara nodded. I got this." She fumbled for the flyer and handed it over. The barista's smile widened slightly. "I see. You've come for the question." "The question?" Mara echoed. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a small menu from beneath the counter and slid it across. The menu wasn't like any Mara had ever seen. There were no drinks or snacks listed, only a series of cryptic phrases. A sip of what could have been. A draft of the unspoken. The tincture of truth. What is this?" Mara asked, glancing up. The barista's eyes gleamed. A selection. Each offering corresponds to a truth, a choice, or a revelation. But choose carefully, there are no refunds, and the answers you receive may not be the ones you expect. Mara felt a chill creep up her spine, but she couldn't turn back now. There had been something in the flyer's promise that resonated with her, a pull she couldn't ignore. "I'll have the tincture of truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The barista nodded, her movements swift and deliberate. She retrieved a small glass vial from one of the shelves, its contents swirling like molten silver, and poured it into a delicate porcelain cup. "Drink," the barista said, sliding the cup toward her. Mara hesitated for only a moment before lifting the cup to her lips. The liquid was warm and slightly bitter, but it sent a strange heat coursing through her veins, as though her very blood was waking up after a long slumber. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room around her began to shift. The walls of the cafe dissolved, replaced by a vast, star-strewn sky. She stood on what felt like solid ground, but when she looked down, she saw only endless darkness. Before her was a figure cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and indistinct. "You have drunk of truth," the figure said, its voice resonating like 1,000 whispers. "Ask your question." Mara's mouth went dry. She had so many questions, ones she had buried deep within herself. But now that she had the chance to ask, only one rose to the surface. Why does everything feel wrong? Like I'm out of place, like I don't belong? The figure was silent for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a strange sadness. "Because you don't." "What do you mean?" Mara demanded, her heart pounding. "You are a thread out of time, a fragment of something that no longer exists. You were never meant to be here, in this world, in this life. You are the remnant of a choice undone." Mara felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "That's not possible. I have memories, a life." "Fabrications," the figure interrupted gently. "Shadows of a reality that was erased. You were meant to fade with it, but something held you here. A tether, an anchor." Mara's mind raced, fragments of her life flashing before her. The constant feeling of displacement, the dreams that didn't feel like dreams, the sense that something was always just out of reach. "What do I do?" she whispered. The figure extended a hand, its fingers shimmering like liquid smoke. "You must choose. Remain here, incomplete but tethered, or return to what was and face the void." The void. The word sent a shiver down her spine, but the thought of staying, of living as a fragment, a misplaced puzzle piece, was unbearable. "I want to go back," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The figure nodded, and the ground beneath her began to dissolve. She felt herself falling, the stars streaking past her like rain. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the cafe. The barista was watching her, her expression inscrutable. "Did you find your answer?" she asked. Mara nodded slowly. "I think so." The barista inclined her head. "Then your tab is settled." Mara left the cafe, stepping back into the foggy alley. The world felt sharper now, as though the colors were too vivid and the air too heavy. She knew something fundamental had changed, but she couldn't yet put it into words. All she knew was that she would never return to Cafe Halcyon, and that somewhere, the void was waiting for her. A subject line that read, "Hey, it's me." No signature, no sender name, just a strange email address that looked like it belonged to a bot or a scammer. At first, I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. The body of the email was brief but cryptic. "I've been trying to reach you. I know the truth about Dad." My fingers froze over the keyboard. The truth about Dad? What the hell did that mean? I stared at the screen for a good minute, debating whether this was some elaborate prank, before finally replying. "Who is this?" The response came within seconds, almost like they'd been waiting. "It's Zoe, your half-sister." Half-sister? My brain short-circuited. Dad had never mentioned another kid. As far as I knew, it was just me, Mom, and him. A solid, unremarkable nuclear family. I needed answers, but I wasn't about to have this conversation over email. I typed back, "Call me," and dropped my number into the reply. My phone rang almost instantly. Her voice was low, measured. "Hey, I wasn't sure you'd believe me." "I don't know what to believe," I admitted. "You said you're my half-sister? What does that even mean?" There was a pause, and I could hear her steadying her breath. "It means your dad had a whole life before you, a life that included me." She explained how she'd found out about me and Dad through a DNA ancestry site. Her mom had always been cagey about who her father was, and when she finally confronted her, the truth came spilling out. "Your dad had a fling with my mom before he met yours. He probably doesn't even know I exist. But now that I know about him, and you, I thought you should know too." The details felt surreal, like something out of a daytime soap. I promised her I'd look into it, though I wasn't sure how to even begin. Confronting Dad felt monumental. So, instead, I did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I called my best friend, Kate, and spilled the entire story. "You have to tell your dad," she said immediately. "You can't just sit on this." "I don't even know if it's true," I countered. "What if she's lying? Or mistaken?" Kate snorted. "DNA doesn't lie, babe. You've got to ask him." That night, after dinner, I casually brought up the topic of ancestry tests. "Hey, Dad, have you ever thought about doing one of those DNA kits? You know, to trace the family tree?" He gave me a look, the kind of sharp side-eye that said he wasn't buying my casual tone. "Why would I need to do that? I know where I come from." "Yeah, but what if there are relatives we don't know about?" I pressed, trying to sound innocent. "There aren't," he said flatly, and that was the end of it. But his tone, defensive, almost too final, stuck with me. The next day, I met Zoe for coffee. I wanted to see her in person, to look her in the eye and decide for myself if she was telling the truth. And the moment I saw her, my doubts evaporated. She looked so much like Dad it was almost eerie. Same dark eyes, same sharp jawline. I could feel my stomach knotting up as we talked. "I'm not here to blow up your life," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "I just wanted to connect. And if your dad doesn't want to know me, that's fine. But I thought you should." Later that night, I cracked. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. Mom was out at book club, and it was just Dad and me in the living room, him half asleep in his recliner. "Dad, I need to ask you something," I began, my heart pounding. He opened one eye lazily. "What's up?" I didn't ease into it. "Do I have a half-sister?" His reaction was instant. He shot up in his chair, fully awake now, his face a mix of shock and guilt. "What?" "I met someone. Her name's Zoe. She says she's your daughter. Is it true?" The color drained from his face. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "I never thought this would come back to haunt me," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "Yes, it's true. But it was a long time ago. Before your mom. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "She's a person, Dad. She's your daughter." He looked genuinely pained, but his response floored me. "I don't owe her anything. That was a mistake I made decades ago. My life is here, with you and your mom. I'm not opening that door." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're seriously just going to pretend she doesn't exist? Look, he said firmly, I made my choice a long time ago. If you want to have a relationship with her, that's your business. But don't drag me into it. And for God's sake, don't tell your mother. She doesn't need to know about this. I felt like I was suffocating. Zoe was out there, wanting nothing more than to connect with her biological father, and here he was, shutting her out like she was some inconvenient rumor. And then I did something impulsive, reckless, even. The next morning, I posted a picture of Zoe and me on Instagram with the caption, "Sometimes family finds you in unexpected ways." I didn't tag Dad, but I didn't need to. Within hours, the photo had made its way to family group chats. By dinner, my mom was calling me, demanding to know who Zoe was. Dad, of course, was furious. He called me selfish, accused me of destroying the family for the sake of drama. Mom was heartbroken, and the guilt of blindsiding her hit me harder than I expected. But at the same time, I felt like I'd done the right thing. Zoe deserved to be acknowledged, even if it made things messy. Now, the family's in chaos. Mom's not speaking to Dad. Dad's not speaking to me. And Zoe, despite everything, has been nothing but gracious, apologizing for causing trouble she never asked for. But was it really my place to expose the truth like that? Or was Dad right to want to keep his past in the past? When Rhea texted me about a mystery box cooking class, I thought it sounded quirky but fun. The description was vague. Open your box. Unlock your creativity. Discover your masterpiece. No list of dishes we'd make. No promises of specific cuisines. Just a challenge to create something extraordinary. Rhea was ecstatic. She loved surprises and chaos. I loved planning and structure. This was bound to be a disaster, but I agreed anyway because, well, Rhea is Rhea. You don't say no to her kind of enthusiasm. The class was held in an industrial-style kitchen with exposed pipes, mood lighting, and an atmosphere that screamed, "Instagram this immediately." Everyone was handed a sealed box at the start, with strict instructions not to open it until Chef Luca gave the signal. He was tall and intense, with a dramatic Italian accent and the kind of charisma that made you want to impress him even if he didn't care. "The rules are simple," he said, pacing the room like a game show host. "You have your box. Inside, you will find ingredients. No recipes. No guidance. Only you and your partner and your imagination. Use the pantry for basics. You have 90 minutes to create magic." Rhea practically vibrated with excitement. I, on the other hand, felt the icy grip of dread. "Ready?" Chef Luca boomed. "Open your boxes." With a dramatic flourish, we tore into ours. Inside was chaos. A pound of ground lamb, a block of feta, a jar of grape jelly, a head of cauliflower, and, why not, a single, solitary kiwi. Rhea clapped her hands like a kid on Christmas morning. "This is amazing. We could do so many things. Lamb meatballs? Jelly glaze? Cauliflower steaks? Ooh, maybe the kiwi for a salsa? Salsa?" I repeated, staring at the kiwi as though it might fight back. "Rhea, that makes no sense." "Neither does life," she said, already reaching for the pantry. "Come on, let's play." "Play?" I asked, incredulous. "This isn't Play-Doh. We need a plan. Let's make a lamb and cauliflower bake. Classic. Simple. Feta crumbles on top for saltiness." "Boring," she sang, waving me off. "We're here to experiment, not make sad casseroles." "It's not a casserole," I muttered, but she was already grabbing honey and chili flakes from the pantry, muttering something about transforming the jelly. Against my better judgment, I decided to meet her halfway. "Fine, let's do meatballs, but we stick to classic seasoning. Salt, pepper, garlic. The jelly stays far, far away from the lamb." "Wrong," Rhea said, her tone annoyingly chipper. "The jelly becomes a glaze. Trust me." "Trust you? You want to glaze lamb with grape jelly, like it's some kind of carnival food." "Exactly," she said, grinning. "Carnivals are awesome." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Rhea, this is insane." "And you're boring," she countered. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Food poisoning," I deadpanned. "Public humiliation." Chef Luca confiscating our box for crimes against culinary decency. Or, she said, raising a finger dramatically, we create something so unique, so mind-blowingly good, that Chef Luca weeps tears of joy. I sighed. There was no arguing with Ria when she got like this. So, we split duties. I handled the lamb, seasoning it with precision and forming perfect little meatballs, while she worked on her grape jelly monstrosity, mixing it with honey, balsamic vinegar, and an obscene amount of chili flakes. When it came time to cook, things went from tense to outright chaotic. The meatballs were sizzling beautifully in the pan when Ria decided to drizzle her glaze in mid-cook. The jelly hissed and spat like it was possessed, and the smell of burnt sugar filled the air. "Ria," I yelped, yanking the pan off the heat. "You're ruining them." "They're caramelizing," she insisted, waving a spoon like a wand. "It's flavor." "It's a disaster," I snapped, trying to salvage what I could. Meanwhile, she was already roasting the cauliflower with a kiwi honey chili concoction that looked like alien goo. By the time we plated, the kitchen was a war zone. Our dish, a messy pile of glazed lamb meatballs, charred cauliflower, and a drizzle of kiwi sauce, looked like something a toddler might make during arts and crafts. Chef Luca approached, his expression inscrutable. He tasted the meatballs first. His eyebrow twitched. Then the cauliflower. A deep inhale. Finally, the kiwi sauce. He set the fork down and stared at us for a long, agonizing moment. "This," he said slowly, "is bold. Risky. Perhaps too risky." He paused, then pointed at the plate. "But somehow it works. Almost." Ria's face lit up like she'd just won an Oscar. I stared at him, incredulous. "Almost?" "Yes," Chef Luca said, with the gravitas of a judge on a cooking competition. "The flavors are surprising. But the execution," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely to the chaos on our plate. Ria elbowed me. "Surprising. You hear that? We're visionaries." I was too stunned to argue. Visionaries? Was I hallucinating? After the class, we packed up our leftovers and walked to the car. Ria couldn't stop gushing about the experience. Did you see his face? He didn't know whether to love it or hate it. "That's art, baby." I stared at her, equal parts annoyed and impressed. "You're insane." "Insanely brilliant," she said, tossing the leftovers into the back seat. "Admit it, though. You had fun." Fun? I thought back to the panic, the burnt jelly, the alien kiwi sauce. Maybe fun wasn't the word I'd use, but I had to admit it wasn't boring. So now I'm here, staring at this half-eaten plate of grape jelly glazed lamb meatballs and wondering, AITA for thinking food should make sense? Or is Ria right that maybe, sometimes, it's okay to set the recipe on fire, literally and figuratively? This all started with my brother, Liam. He's one of those people who's too nice for his own good. The kind of guy who apologizes when someone bumps into him. For years, he's been stuck in a loop of terrible relationships because he has this unshakable faith in humanity. People just need understanding, he always says. Yeah, well, understanding doesn't pay the therapy bills, Liam. His latest disaster was Valerie. I'm not exaggerating when I say she was a walking red flag factory. She showed up at family dinners wearing sunglasses indoors, claiming it was for energy shielding. She called herself a professional healer, but had no certifications, just a website full of stock photos and testimonials that were probably written by ChatGPT. Every conversation with her veered into crystals, chakras, or how meat eaters had heavy auras. Liam doesn't even believe in that stuff, but he'd just nod along, starry-eyed. I tried to bite my tongue. I really did. But then she moved in with him after 2 months of dating. No job, no rent, just vibes. I came over one afternoon and found her burning sage in the kitchen because she thought the fridge had negative energy. Liam was scrubbing the walls because Valerie claimed the paint was blocking her creativity. My brother, scrubbing walls for this woman? It was like watching someone invite a wrecking ball into their home and thanking it for redecorating. I decided it was time for an intervention. The problem was, Liam wouldn't listen to me. He'd just wave off my concerns with, "You don't know her like I do." So, I decided to make him see her the way I did. If he couldn't hear the truth, Maybe he could experience it. That's how Operation Karma Chameleon was born. First, I did some recon. I spent hours lurking on Valerie's website and social media, reading her ridiculous posts about harnessing moonlight and spiritual debt. It didn't take long to realize she had a very specific formula for how she operated. She'd worm her way into people's lives, spin some mystical nonsense about how they needed her guidance, and then subtly drain them of money, time, and energy. It wasn't just Liam. She had a trail of exes, clients, and even friends who'd all ended up broke, disillusioned, or both. My plan was simple. Out Valerie. If she could manipulate Liam into thinking she was his savior, I could manipulate her into exposing herself. Step 1 was infiltrating her inner circle. I booked a healing session through her website under a fake name. I showed up to her studio, a tiny room filled with candles, tapestries, and the overwhelming smell of patchouli, and played the part of a clueless but enthusiastic client. "Wow, your energy is so strong," I said, pretending to be mesmerized. She ate it up. By the end of the session, she was inviting me to her private spiritual retreats. Perfect. Step 2 was gaining her trust. Over the next few weeks, I attended her workshops, complimented her aura, and even bought one of her $50 crystal necklaces. It was painful, but I needed her to think I was just another gullible follower. Once she started confiding in me, I knew I was in. Step 3 was planting the seeds of chaos. During one of her workshops, I casually mentioned how I'd been channeling new energy and had started receiving visions. Valerie's eyes lit up. "What kind of visions?" she asked. "Oh, just little things," I said, pretending to be shy. "Like warnings about people in my life." One of them had a very dark aura, and the energy felt parasitic. I didn't name names, but I saw the wheels turning in her head. Over the next few days, I upped the ante. I left anonymous notes in her studio, written in flowery handwriting, saying things like, "Beware the shadow you invite into your circle, and energy vampires can wear familiar faces." I sent her cryptic texts from a burner phone, claiming to be a fellow empath who'd been guided to warn her. The final phase of the plan was to make her paranoid enough to self-destruct. During her next workshop, I accidentally let it slip that I'd been meditating and had seen a vision of her with a man who was slowly draining her light. "You need to protect yourself," I said, my voice dripping with concern. "I think he's blocking your path to true abundance." By now, Valerie was so spooked she could barely focus. She started snapping at Liam over little things, accusing him of being too grounded and not spiritually evolved enough to support her journey. Liam, sweet clueless Liam, just kept apologizing and asking how he could help. But Valerie's paranoia spiraled out of control. She began banning him from certain rooms in their apartment, claiming his earthbound energy was interfering with her rituals. The breaking point came when she told Liam he needed to give up his toxic attachments, which, according to her, included his Xbox, his job, and his childhood stuffed bear, Mr. Snuggles. Liam finally snapped. "This is insane," he said. "You're insane." Valerie stormed out, screaming about how he'd never ascend, and calling him a spiritual leech. She packed her crystals, her sage, and her 3-ring binder of moon charts and left that same night. Liam was devastated at first, but after a few weeks, he started to realize how much better his life was without her. He's back to playing Xbox and eating pizza rolls, and I've never seen him happier. He even thanked me for always having his back, which, yeah, felt a little ironic, but I'll take it. The only hitch? Valerie's been posting vague threats on social media about false prophets and betrayals from within. Part of me wonders if she's figured it out, but honestly, I don't care. Liam's free, and she's someone else's problem now. So, AITA? The first sign that something was wrong came when my dog stopped barking at the door. Daisy, my relentless, scrappy mutt, had a bark that could wake the dead, and every package delivery or passing squirrel usually triggered a symphony. But that morning, when the knock came, Daisy just stared at the door and whimpered, her tail tucked low. I glanced through the peephole. There was a man standing there, clean-cut in an unnervingly precise way, wearing a dark suit and holding a black briefcase. He could have been selling insurance or delivering a court summons, except for his eyes. They were impossibly dark, blacker than ink, blacker than shadows, blacker than the void itself. When he noticed me looking, he tilted his head slightly, like a curious bird. "I can hear you breathing," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost like a purr. My stomach dropped. "No, not interested." I backed away from the door. Daisy growled low in her throat, but she didn't move. She was glued to the floor like she knew something I didn't. The knocking stopped. For a second, I thought he was gone, but when I dared to peek through the peephole again, he was still there. Only now, he was smiling. "You've already opened the door once," he said. "You might as well do it again." My hand froze on the deadbolt. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as his words echoed in my head. "You've already opened the door once." The problem was, I hadn't. At least, I didn't remember opening it. I swallowed hard and stepped back, determined to wait him out. People like him, salesmen, solicitors, whatever he was, gave up eventually. Hours passed, then more. By nightfall, he was still there. I tried to distract myself, burying my head in work, binge-watching terrible reality shows, scrolling endlessly on my phone. But every time I checked, he was still standing on the porch, briefcase in hand, as still as a statue. By midnight, I'd convinced myself he'd left. I hadn't heard a sound from the door in hours, and Daisy had relaxed enough to fall asleep in her usual spot by the couch. I decided to risk a look. I approached the door cautiously, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. When I leaned in to peer through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. He wasn't on the porch anymore. He was standing inside the house. I spun around, my heart hammering, but the room was empty. Daisy was still asleep, snoring softly, oblivious. I whipped my head back to the peephole, and there he was again. On the porch, exactly where he'd been before. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and groan of the house sent my nerves into overdrive. By dawn, my eyes were bloodshot, and I was ready to chalk the whole thing up to sleep deprivation and paranoia. I opened the door to grab the morning paper, but instead of the newspaper, there was a note. It read, "You don't remember letting me in, but you did." The words hit me like ice water. My first instinct was to crumple the note and toss it, but the nagging sense of unease wouldn't let me. I scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. At first, everything seemed normal. My jacket draped over the chair, Daisy's leash hanging by the door. But then I saw it. The briefcase. It was sitting in the middle of the living room, sleek and black, with no indication of how it had gotten there. I approached it slowly, every step weighed down by dread. Daisy stirred from her sleep, sniffed the air, and immediately retreated under the table with a low whine. "Stay there," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to her or myself. The briefcase clicked open easily, almost invitingly. Inside, there were no papers, no documents, just a single photograph. It was of me, standing at the door, staring out through the peephole. But in the picture, the man wasn't on the porch. He was standing behind me. My blood turned to ice. I dropped the photo and slammed the briefcase shut, my hands shaking. Daisy let out a bark, sharp and frantic, and I spun around to see her staring at the corner of the room. It was empty, but I knew better now. Empty didn't mean safe. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but of course, there was no trace of the man. They searched the house, chalked it up to a prank, and told me to keep an eye out. After they left, I tried to convince myself it was over. I locked every door and window, triple-checked every corner. But that night, as I lay in bed, the lights still on, I felt it, a presence. Not a sound, not a movement, just the unmistakable sense of being watched. I turned over slowly, my heart pounding, and there he was, standing at the foot of the bed, his black eyes gleaming like they'd been carved out of the void. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said, his voice as calm and cold as death. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside, barefoot in the freezing night air, with Daisy barking beside me. The house was dark, the door wide open, but I didn't go back in. I never went back in. The house sold a few months later. Sometimes I wonder about the new owners. whether they've seen him, whether they've opened the door. But I don't dwell on it for long. I've learned to keep my doors locked. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and shadows stretch just a little too far, I hear him knocking. And I don't look.